Hello, everyone. So this lecture is going to be on how to think about empire by Arundhati Roy. The entire article is actually published in the Boston Review on January 3rd, 2019. It is an interview between uh, Avni Sejpal and Arundhati Roy, the acclaimed Indian author and activist known for God of Small Things, 1997. So this conversation, uh, Roy explores her view on empire, power, and censorship, along with storytelling and resistance. So, this is actually a summary which could synthesize the major points on Arundhati Roy's interview, and it is mostly about the historical context and the scholarly perspective that she has in the argument. To move into the first argument placed between Sejpal and Arundhati Roy, they talk about revisiting the pillars of empire. So Sejpal references Roy's 2004 book, An Ordinary Person's Guide to Empire, which identified globalization, neoliberalism, uh, militarism, and corporate medias and empires pillars, which exemplified the US-led wars in Iraq, and Afghanistan. Uh, in 2019, Roy updates this framework, emphasizing how capital exploits racism, casteism, sexism, and gender uh, to fragment resistance and to sustain power. So she describes casteism as a Hindu form of racism, which is rooted in texts like Manusmriti, which codifies hierarchies. Uh, and in her essay, The Doctor and the Saint, 2014, she critiques the limitations uh, to caste. She also talks about India's economy, where 90% of the informal workers are in caste-based roles. So here, Roy highlights neoliberal policies, like in 2017, goods and service taxes, which favor the corporation of, while the marginalizing Dalits were given 7.3 percentage of rise in crime against uh, scheduled castes. So she says that racism, as seen in 2019, according to the Citizenship Amendment Act, it excluded Muslims and sexism. It reflected in declining of women's labor participation. So Roy critiques that India's lefts failed to address these issues, and she calls this as a fusion of caste and capitalism, which is actually a dangerous new alloy. And she reinforcingly says that the upper caste dominance in land, because 70% of the land is owned by the upper caste, and she also says that the corporate leadership, which is 80% of boardroom position, is maintained by the upper caste. So these are the things that they discuss under revisiting the pillars of empire. So to move on to the next one, empire and imagination, Roy argues that the empire colonizes imagination, which actually reduces it to propaganda. In the text, The End of Imagination, she critiques how India's nuclear tests are state driven narratives which ignore ecological costs. So, in her novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, she actually features Anjum, a trans woman, and Thilo, a Kashmiri activist challenging caste and state oppression, while she also focuses on The God of Small Things, which exposes the caste through Ammu and Veluta. So she contrasts these with media glorification of Kashmir military, where the AFS PA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, enables abuses since uh, 1989. So she talks about films like Uri, the surgical strike in 2019, which sanitized civilian casualties, and she also mentions about her essay, The Language of Literature, 2018, which champions literature's humanizing power, citing Kashmiri poets. Uh, Apart from this, Roy also talks about how imagination is tied to ecological resistance, which is uh, showed in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, how Yamuna, the river Yamuna, is polluted, and her Narmada activism almost like 40 million are dispersed. So this is how she tells that narrative resistance, uh, though it faces few limitations and it has few limits, which has uh, which has immediate action needed. So she moves on to talk about censorship and silences, where Roy recounts her 2002 imprisonment for contempt of court over the Narmada Dam criticism, which displaced over 40 million, mostly Adivasis and Dalits. So, in her essay, she says that the greater common good, that's the essay she published in 1999. It details this struggle, and it talks about exploiting legal intimidations under the authorities. So she says that in a text, Listening to Grasshoppers 2009, she says that this silencing and erasing of Adivasi narratives will become more of a marginalized voices. So she goes on to talk about all the 70% of news channels which do not represent all those uh, marginalized voices. They ensure that these voices are unheard. And this is a problem with post colonialism, is what she points out. She says that uh, post colonialism is actually a break from empire, which argues India's imperial, which actually, I would say, uh, it perpetuates imperial practices. So, in her essay, The End of Imagination, she critiques the nuclear programs as colonial powers, and she also details on how everybody should reflect on neoliberalism and uh, in her work Capitalism, A Ghost Story 2014, she critiques on how the corporate exploitation, as in 2020 forming last Scotland protest, goes on. So she says that the power is seen as dynamics, which aligns with the post-colonial state legacies given in line with Chakrabarti's thought. So she goes on to tell that this is actually resistance, and there is also resistance in storytelling. So she sees storytelling as a resistance blending with critique, with emotions, um, in most of her works, for example, the Ministry of Utmost Happiness or Working with the Comrades in 2010. So it centers on uh, Kashmiri voices, it centers on transgender. So the language of literature argues mostly with the narratives which counters all these propaganda, scientific, all those poets. So she goes on to critique the most collective movement like the 2019 uh, Shaheen protest, where Muslim women were challenged. And she goes on to talk about the literacy rate, and the digital divide limit reach. So these are the movement. Also, she adds in about the global movement, like the Black Lives Matter in 2020. So these are the things that she goes on to talk. And to conclude, there is a conversation on the global context where uh, Roy links India's Hindu nationalism to global authoritarianism, where she cites the 2019 uh, shoot where 49 people were dead. And she also points out the 2020 riot, which happened in Delhi, where 53 people died. So, in her work, Democracy, who is she when she is at home? So, this actually critiques the imperialism. And she also talks about how 1% of the top is more richer, and they have 50% of wealth. And this is where the inequality lies in. She talks about this environmental crisis where India is 21 of 30 most polluted cities, which is link which is in link with the imperial extraction, as Roy points out from her Narmada activism. So she says that these should be given much concentration because this is exposing power, and this is resistance through narrative, and this is an alternative to ensure that all her work, all her historical data, all her scholarly insights reveal through a critique of empire as a dynamic. And she says that this insight should resonate, and this insight should go on to expand to global authoritarianism and inequality. And this is actually an fierce poetic voice, which remains as a vital call to rethink of how power is in our time. So this is the entire crux of Arundhati Roy's how to think about empire. Thank you.